So this video is about circles, and specifically not circles from geometry, though a circle is a circle is a circle, but circles when they're in the coordinate plane, which means we're going to have a formula or an equation that represents all the points that form that circle. And here it is, where x is a variable that's part of the formula, y is a variable that's part of the formula, h and k would typically be constants. And in fact, the center point, let's call it C, would be located at h comma k. So with work from hopefully previously, but if not in work to come, we will talk about how typically we have this x minus h and y minus k, and the h and k represent a horizontal shift, that would be the h, whether it be left or right, and a vertical shift, that would be k, where it'd be up or down, positive or negative. And in this formula, r represents the radius of the circle. So if I gave you, for instance, hk, or the center point, is equal to 6 comma 3, then I would have a center point as my graph to the left shows. And if I had a radius equal to, what is that, 3? Then, in fact, this data right here represents that circle there. And the equation for that circle would look as follows. X minus 6, squared, plus y minus 3, the quantity squared, equals 9. Note that this 9 is actually 3 squared, which is the radius squared. Okay? So let's scroll up and let's take a look at some other things. So that's a circle. One of the more difficult tasks, so you're going to be asked to do exactly that, given properties of a circle, to write out the equation. You'll probably be, I believe you'll be given the equation. For instance, let's write this down, this guy here. X minus 7 squared plus y plus 5 squared equals 15. And so what would be the particulars about that? You could be asked two things. One, what is the information telling you? And two, graph it. So you should be able to tell me that the center point, which is h comma k, is equal to the following: 7 comma negative 5. That's really y minus negative 5, so that you can pull out the k value, which is negative 5. And then the radius is equal to this number, except it's not quite. It's because this is actually equal to r squared. So that means r squared is equal to 15, which means r is equal to plus or minus the square root of 15. So whenever you take the square root of both sides of an equation, you should be considering the positive and negative. But in this case, since we're talking about the radius, which is a distance from the center to all the points that make up the circle, we disregard the negative, so we get r is equal to the square root of 15. If you are asked to graph this function, which is a circle, it would look something like this. I'll change colors so we can see this a little better. I'm going to plot the point, the center point, 7, negative 3. So I'm going to come over 7, and I'm going to come down, 7, negative 5. I'm going to come down to negative 5. And there's my center point. But clearly I'm not going to be able to graph this. So we're going to delete that guy. And we're going to draw in this y-axis. And I'm going to shift my point over. So again, we got 7. So 3, 6, 7, and negative 5, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I was off with that point anyway. Nice. Okay, so that's my center point. Again, it's at 7, negative 5. But I have a radius of the square root of 15. So hopefully you should know that that's a little bit less than 4. Why? Because the square root of 16 is equal to 4. And so it's a little bit less than 4. So my circle would be something like this-ish. I'm going to draw kind of 4 points here. And then I'm going to sketch this guy. Looks something like that. And I know it's not a very nice circle. I can draw them better on the board, but there's that guy. Okay, so that's the circle that's represented by this equation. All right. So then the last thing is a little bit more difficult task. And it requires you to pull back into Algebra 2. And so you're given, for instance, the following. So here's an example. X squared plus y squared plus 8x minus 2y equals -1. And so this is not in standard form. And so those numbers don't tell you anything. They don't give you any information about the circle that you can visualize. So what we need to do is we need to complete the square. And hopefully you spent some time, if not an abundant amount of time, in high school working on this. But we are going to complete the square. So I'm going to group my x terms, x squared plus 8x. And I'm going to leave a little space here. And then I'm going to group my y terms, leave another space here, and have this -1. I'm going to change color so you can follow me. I actually didn't need to do it just yet. What I'm looking for is I'm trying to create a trinomial here so that it'll be the product of two binomials, which will allow me to write this as x plus or minus some number squared. So in other words, these two binomials will be the same so that I can square it or write it that way. But I have to determine what to add right here in order to do that. So what I end up doing is I figure out this 8 must be a +4 and a +4, because when I do the distribution on this, I would get x squared plus 4x plus 4x plus 16. These two add together to be this 8x. So some people tell you to take this coefficient and divide it by 2 to figure out what this is, and then square it. But I'm trying to lay out why you're doing those things, not just to do them. So I'm going to add 16 to this side of the equation, to the left side, in order to complete this square. But since I added 16, you chose to do that, or I chose to do that, I'm going to have to add 16 on the right-hand side of the equation. Okay? So now we're going to have to do the same thing with the y values. Let's change to orange. And so I'm going to have this y term, and it's going to be the product, this y term, I have to figure out what to add. But I want to end up having this y term to be y plus or minus some number squared. So I'm going to have these two binomials, and they're going to be, the product of them is going to be this squared y term. So they must be the same. And since this is a -2, this is going to have to be -1 and -1. Same process. I'm going to take this coefficient and divide it by 2. Why? I need to divide it by 2 because the sum of the two middle terms when I do distribution are going to end up being that, that sum. Y times y is y squared minus 1y minus another 1y plus 1. So these two add up to this -2y, which is that guy right there. So what do I have to add to the left-hand side of my equation to complete the square? I have to add 1. That gives us this -1 down here because it's the same as these two binomials. And since I added 1 to the left-hand side, I'm going to have to add 1 to the right-hand side. So now I'm going to write this, I'm going to erase this down here. I'm going to write this right-hand side as the rest of this sum. And so I'm going to have equals, and this side is 16 minus 1 plus 1. So it's just going to be 16, which then tells me that I have this equation. And I can rewrite 16 as 4 squared, which tells me that the center point of my circle is -4, 1, and my radius of the radius of my circle is 4. Okay? I will try to see if I have another complete the square video and add that to the list of things to watch, so that's not jammed up with 2 of them to do at once. But that's pretty much some of the things that you're going to be asked to do and some of the things you need to understand. Hopefully that works out. Bye.